Oh shit. Mind what the technique has come to. Z channels have already called it the Russian Pearl Harbor. Of course, it is difficult to agree with this assessment, because there are nuances, as they say, and we will talk about these nuances today. There are big differences from Pearl Harbor. But the fact that this is a black day for the Russian aerospace forces, for the Russian military aviation, and in general, probably for the Russian army, is certainly true. And this is a great humiliation for Vladimir Putin, because it happened unprecedented. The 1st of June was the largest such attack against the strategic aviation of the Russian Federation in the entire history of the existence of this aviation. What happened? Well, if you believe the statements of the Ukrainian side, the Ukrainians, with the help of drones, managed to damage more than 40 aircraft at 4 air bases in different parts of Russia. This is the Murmansk region, the Olenya air base. This is the Irkutsk region, the Belaya air base. This is the Ivanovo region, the Ivanovo base, and the Ryazan region, the Dyagilevo base. Damaged aircraft of 50. This is a flying radar. A rare aircraft. Russia has very few of them, and some of them have already been damaged earlier. And here's another one damaged. Tu-95 and Tu-22M3. German military analyst Julian Repp assesses what happened like this. He writes, "This is the largest attack ever carried out against the strategic armed forces of Russia. The pictures show that numerous Tu-95 strategic bombers are burning. The Russian response is likely to be crushing," he suggests. There are big doubts about 40 planes. For example, even Ukrainian sources, independent sources, for example, the Ukrainian channel OSINT analysts, that is, analysts on open data, which is called Dnipro OSINT, writes that they were able to confirm damage to only 8 aircraft. Therefore, probably 40. This is still a very inflated estimate. Ukrainian journalists claim that the Ukrainian special services allegedly destroyed up to half of the total number of combat-ready units of strategic aviation of the aerospace forces of the Russian Federation in a few hours. But most likely this is a strong exaggeration. But this does not mean that something insignificant has happened. No, you still accomplished is unprecedented. Because the loss of even 1 or 2 strategic aircraft is a huge event by the standards of this war and in general historically. Here we are probably talking about a dozen similar machines. Indeed, this has never happened, and this is a slap in the face to Vladimir Putin, a slap in the face of the Russian army, a slap in the face of the Russian air defense, or rather the Russian counterintelligence and the FS. Because with the help of air defense, it was impossible to prevent such an attack, apparently, or unreal. It should have been counterintelligence that worked, it should have been the special services that missed what they missed. We're going to talk about what exactly. In order to understand the scale of what happened, and not to exaggerate it, you can simply recall for reference how many similar aircraft Russia has. In other words, we know that at least 7 Tu-95 and 1 Tu-22M3 were damaged. 8 aircraft confirmed. That's at least at the time of recording this video, according to Ukrainian sources, independent. Russia, if we proceed from open data, simply has 58 Tu-95 and 55 Tu-22M3 aircraft published on Wikipedia. That is, not even 10% of the total number was destroyed. The blow is painful, of course, and serious, but still, it is clearly not a disaster. And it is unlikely to have any critical impact on Russian military capabilities. In other words, I think that this is, of course, rather a symbolic, and very bright, very effective, I would say, first of all, an ineffective action that will have more political consequences than military ones. I guess so. We also have to assume that some aircraft may be subject to repair. Not all of them probably burned to the ground and were destroyed to such a state that they cannot be restored. That's why, maybe some more will be restored. Unlike other similar attacks, we know quite well what happened this time. Because we have a lot of interesting personnel, and the Ukrainian side is promptly quite open and told in detail about how this operation is called, how it was prepared, and what, in fact, it consisted of. Well, the Ukrainian media, with reference to the SBU, Write that the operation was called the Web. It was prepared for about a year and a half under the personal control of the president of the country, Vladimir Zelensky. Ukrainian media claim that all those involved in the organization of this attack have already left the territory of Russia and are supposedly safe, and it is impossible to arrest someone. Well, whether it's true or not, of course, it's difficult to verify, but such a statement. What was the operation? To Russia, at first specifically to Chelyabinsk, apparently through neighboring Kazakhstan. There is a border there. First, the F-drones were transported, then wooden boxes for these drones for drones. The boxes were placed under the roof of metal containers with opening roofs and transported to the desired regions. Some trucks were rented, on which these containers were installed on the platform. And, apparently, the driver of these cars, and, probably, the owners of these cars. The transport companies did not even know what was being transported. That is, they were used blindly. These vehicles were sent by order to points located near the air bases. And when they were near the air bases, the container lids were opened remotely, the drones took off, and attacked the objects that were supposed to attack, military bases. The method is sophisticated, the operation is, of course, fantastically successful, and incredibly thoughtful, incredibly technological. And surprisingly, out of the 5 objects that were supposed to attack, 4 were successfully attacked, apparently. In other words, the percentage of operation efficiency is very high. Objects were attacked not only in central Russia, but also in the Murmansk region, in the Irkutsk region. This is 2,000 and 5,000 kilometers from Kiev, respectively. There, in addition to the 4 affected, there is also a Ukrainian object in the Amur region. It was also supposed to be attacked in the same way, but there a truck with drones exploded before the attack, either due to a malfunction, or because it was noticed ahead of time, and an explosion occurred, known about the death of 1 person. By the way, in the first hours it was claimed that the Ukrainians allegedly hit not only planes, but also submarines. A number of media outlets said that the nuclear submarine base in Severomorsk in the Murmansk region allegedly came under attack. But it turned out that there was a mix-up. In fact, the footage shows the consequences of the strikes on the Olenya airbase in the same region. The Russian Defense Ministry did not deny that the planes were damaged. It is impossible to deny, because there are too many frames, too much evidence. And somewhere at the beginning of the 7th evening in Moscow, they rolled out a statement about an enemy strike, in which there is a lot of such newspeak, and the expected such a brave intonation. I quote, "Ukraine has committed a terrorist attack with the use of airborne drones against airfields in the Murmansk, Irkutsk, Ivanovo, Ryazan, and Amur regions. All attacks were repelled at military airfields in the Ivanovo, Ryazan, and Amur regions. Several pieces of aviation equipment caught fire at military airfields in the Irkutsk and Murmansk regions. After the attack in the drones PV, the fires have been eliminated. There are no casualties among the military and civilian personnel. But the Z channels, which of course write a lot about all this, today demonstrate a rare unanimity for themselves. Almost none of them are trying to somehow dispute or downplay the scale of what happened. For example, Roman Alekhine, such a major Z author, called the enemy attack on 4 air bases the Russian Pearl Harbor, and his colleague Alexei Zhivov the worst day since June 22, 1941 year. And here is a Russian Pearl Harbor, as well Soroibus, a very bright image, and creates some such associations. Do you know why you like this channel? I think it's because the Americans, as we know, entered the war after Pearl Harbor. They had not wanted to fight for a long time before. The Japanese attacked them. They entered the war. And this largely predetermined the course of the Second World War. In this Russian Pearl Harbor, there is such a hope that Russia somehow still does not fight, because it seems like it does not want to really fight. More precisely, she is fighting, but she does not win, because, they say, she does not want to. But now some kind of Pearl Harbor is going to happen. We have been dealt such a demonstrative painful blow. Now we will start a war. How will we defeat the Japanese? Apparently, our version of the Japanese is possible with the help of atomic weapons, as the Americans did. These are the associations that are read, but we'll talk more about whether Pearl Harbor is lower or not Pearl Harbor. There is such a channel fighter bomber, which specializes in aviation. He states that the failure of the Russian side is precisely that it missed the containers with drones. According to the blogger, at the X hour, when everything actually happened, nothing could be done. Drones were used from the shortest distance. Of course, it was impossible to withdraw aircraft from under attack, as well as to use shells, C-300 and so on against them. But, by the way, why you can't use shells, to be honest, I don't really understand. Shells including, as far as I know, designed for close combat, and, in particular, to shoot down drones. But here they are for some reason. Either they were not at these air bases, or they could not resist these drones, or they turned out to be ineffective. To quote the fighter bomber, surprisingly, neither tires, nor planes painted on concrete, nor jetty swords, nor PVN, these are air surveillance points every 100 meters, did not save the planes. Today will later be called the Black Day of long-range aviation of Russia. And the day is not over yet. The personnel of the air bases were raised in a gun, but I don't really imagine what they can do now with such drones. Can't accept that. And a photo report, of course. Some of his colleagues in the shop are beaten at the same time by impotent anger. For example, the author of the Voivode channel broadcasts offers to shoot 500 Ukrainian prisoners on camera after what happened. There are a lot of shots of this attack, and one of the most striking is how someone is an observer, perhaps also a trucker. Well, judging by his comments, perhaps a trucker is filming how these drones fly out of trucks. Here, in fact, we can directly see how it happened and enjoy the comments. Here he is, a cop took off again yesterday. Firm where it takes off, nothing is clear. Here he is, a clown, a bitch for no reason. Both of them. Oh, the things be. Diema, what the technique has come to. But in other shots, truckers who were standing near the city of Usely-Sibirskoye, right next to this Belaya airbase. They tried to somehow neutralize them and shoot them down with something, either throw stones, or it's not very visible on the frames. But it's clear that they are trying to do something. And it is claimed that the Siberians allegedly really managed to shoot down several drones and reduce the damage to the white. But the shooting quality is very poor, so it is difficult to establish whether this is the case. The American edition of Axios reported that the Ukrainians allegedly warned the administration of Donald Trump about the attack on the 1st of June. And in the same message, Axios reminds that at the same time, the Ukrainian side is not going to withdraw from the negotiation process with Russia. It sent a delegation headed by Defense Minister Rustem Umerov to Istanbul. Moreover, the message that Ukraine is continuing negotiations with Russia, sending its delegation, followed exactly after these attacks took place. They became known about them. In other words, it was some kind of mockery on the part of Ukrainians. We have dealt you a new painful, humiliating blow, and are ready to talk to you further. Let's talk now, so to speak. As far as we know, this attack on the air bases did without civilian casualties, at least. We do not know about the military, and perhaps we will not know. Because the military department usually hides such data about such victims, but at the same time, 2 more major railway accidents took place on Sunday night in the frontline regions of Russia. Near Bryansk, after the collapse of a road bridge on the railway tracks, a passenger train that was going to Moscow derailed. In the Kursk region, a railway bridge collapsed under a freight train. 7 people were killed and dozens were injured as a result of these incidents. The investigative committee of Russia qualified these incidents as terrorist attacks. The Ukrainian side has claimed responsibility for these 2 train wrecks, but admitted that on the night of the 31st of May, blew a freight train near the occupied Melitopol. Vladimir Putin has not yet commented on the sabotage near Bryansk and Kursk, nor attacks on Russian long-range airfields. At the time of recording this video, we know that usually at such moments Vladimir Putin prefers to be silent for a little while, wait until they fall down with passion. And in general, he does not like to associate himself with defeats. He likes to associate himself with victories. Therefore, most likely, he will wait for a pause, and, probably, some Russian response will follow. Most likely in the form of new fierce missile and drone strikes on Ukrainian territory. After which Putin will be able to speak no longer in such a humiliated form, as if he were speaking today, now. What conclusions can be drawn from this story? But the first thing I want to say, after all, of course, this is not the Russian Pearl Harbor, and not the new 22nd of June. Why? Because Russia did not face someone else's treacherous aggression, as happened to the Soviet Union on June 22nd, and as happened to the United States during Pearl Harbor. No, this is not aggression. On the other hand, this is an unexpected turn of the war, which Russia treacherously unleashed just at the time. Of course, this is Vladimir Putin's humiliation on the eve of a new round of talks in Istanbul on June 2nd. Ukraine has demonstrated that it can still inflict extremely painful blows on Russia in the deepest rear and undermine Russia's military potential. The Tu-95, Tu-22M3 are strategic bombers. They are part of the Russian nuclear triad. And strikes on them not only reduce Russia's military potential in terms of strikes against Ukraine now in this war, but the Tu-95, as far as we know, are actively involved in hostilities against Ukraine. Launch rockets of different modifications. This includes a strike on planes that directly bomb Ukraine, so Ukraine protects itself in this way. But it is also a blow to the Russian nuclear forces. It is a reduction in Russia's nuclear potential, maybe a symbolic reduction. But at the same time, it is symbolic and very symbolic. Of course, there are other ways to deliver nuclear weapons today, and strategic bombers are far from the most modern and effective. There are also a variety of missiles. There are nuclear submarines. It cannot be said that the Russian nuclear potential, which has lost these bombers, will somehow seriously suffer. No, it probably isn't. But nevertheless, at this level of symbols, the level of gestures, this is a very bright, very unpleasant step for the Kremlin. How will Russia react, in addition to strikes on Ukraine? It can be assumed that a witch hunt will begin now, a search for suspects will begin, and the first to be handed out will probably be the drivers of trucks, the owners of the companies to which these trucks belong, those who rented these trucks, who provided them, and so on. In general, do you remember how it was with the Crimean Bridge when it was blown up? Then they arrested and still keep behind bars some rather random people who owned rented cars, who had no idea what was being transported there, and so on, who may have shown some kind of inattention, carelessness. But in general, these are people without shoulder straps, who were not obliged to be prudent to manifest. Actually, the Russian counterintelligence agents, who overlooked these trucks somewhere, overslept, looked through, did not understand what was happening, did not see it, should be responsible for what happened, in theory, from the Russian side. Here, but I think that some switchmen will answer, of course, first of all. Maybe even those guys who tried to knock down the copters with stones, maybe they. Maybe Russian soldiers who filmed the consequences of these explosions, like this serviceman. Maybe the trucker who commented on how these drones take off. It turns out that it was forbidden to shoot it. It is impossible to post it. So a person must answer before the law. I think now such a witch hunt will begin. Surely, we should expect any tightening in the field of cargo transportation. Everyone will be checked 38 times now. Everything will become much more complicated, more expensive. Bribes will increase. In general, those who are engaged in cargo transportation, I think they are waiting for various troubles and difficulties. Then, it should be recognized that the drone war is reaching a new level. Once again, there is a situation when fairly cheap devices, these drones, cause damage to extremely expensive things, such as strategic bombers. There were estimates that Russia allegedly suffered about $2 billion in losses from these attacks. The cost of these drones is probably hundreds or thousands of times less. Maybe 2 billion is an exaggeration, of course, but nevertheless. It is possible to imagine how much tens or hundreds of millions of dollars is worth, perhaps one Russian strategic bomber. We see that the Russian special services and the military still cannot close either the sky or the borders of Russia. And no point on Russian territory, well, maybe, with the exception of Vladimir Putin's residence, can be considered safe. Even the deepest rear. Siberia, the Far East, the Far North. All these points are subject to Ukrainian strikes. No one can feel safe anywhere. Remember, Vladimir Medinsky said at the talks that Russia, they say, is ready to fight as much as you want. He recalled the Northern War and said that Russia was ready to fight for 20 years. This is such a peculiar response of Ukrainians, and, probably, an offer to think to the residents of Russia. They are ready to live for 20 years in such conditions, in a situation where a drone can fly to any place, when trains derail, when airfields explode, when drone attacks constantly interfere with civil aviation, interfere with normal life. Well, you might wonder if you want to live in such conditions for 20 years. And in conclusion, I'll say a little personal. When I was a child, I dreamed of becoming a military pilot. I think it's good that he didn't, because on February 24th of the 22nd year, he would have either had to give up his life's work or become an accomplice to a major war crime, aggression against a peaceful neighboring state. But nevertheless, I was interested in airplanes, read a lot about them, studied, and this topic is not completely alien to me, not quite far away. And somewhere I continue to love this topic. And when I see footage of Russian military planes burning at airfields, well, this child inside me, who read about these planes, who loved them, I was so proud that his country has such a powerful aviation, this child inside me is upset. Well, an adult looks at these planes and understands that many of them, perhaps specifically these planes flew, launched missiles that fell on Ukraine, not only on military facilities, but also on peaceful cities. Killed people, innocent people, killed children. And adult, of course, not sorry. If I can show my offense and claim to anyone, it is to Vladimir Putin, who took and used, among other things, Russian strategic aviation, which should be used as a deterrent tool, as a force that does not allow us to be attacked, as something that protects us and should never be used. This is a weapon that should lie down and simply protect our country with its existence. These weapons were taken and used in order to strike, not nuclear, conventional strikes against Ukraine. So we reap the fruits from the seeds that were sown in the 2014 year, in the 2022 year, which we continue to sow. Here are the shoots. And maybe there will be more flowers, and then there will be berries.